Well, we'd like to welcome you tonight on behalf of the Soil Health Academy and Understanding Ag to tonight's presentation by Sara Keough on plant-based meats. It's an honor to have Sara back again. She's done previous webinars for us. If you're not familiar with Sara, she's an eco-nutritionalist who began her career in ecology work in her home state of Colorado and now practices full-time as a clinical nutritionalist in Elliott City, Maryland, where she supports patients with a wide variety of health conditions, including digestive issues, autoimmune disorders, heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. Educating patients on the value of nutrient-dense foods from local farms is of vital importance in her practice, as this is an essential component of the healing process for each and every patient. By utilizing advanced micronutrient testing and omega-3 and 6 fatty acid testing for patients, Sara is able to identify key nutrient deficiencies in order to get to the root cause of their conditions. Sara is passionate about connecting her patients with local farms to source their foods, as she truly believes that regenerative farmers are the real healers of the planet and play a pivotal role in restoring human and ecological health. Sara, how are you this evening?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I know you've had a few changes here in the last few months. Would you like to update us on what you've got going on?
Yeah, definitely. So I was working in a pretty busy primary care practice for the last couple years, and things are interesting, of course, during the COVID time this past year. And I transitioned into a private practice this past summer. It's around July. And yeah, it's been a good change. I live on a little horse farm, so it's nice to work from home, and everything's virtual now. So my practice is completely virtual. And I have time to work on some other projects and, supporting the farming community and regenerative agriculture. So,
well, we really appreciate that. And, for those who may not be aware, Sara's now one of our technical advisors for Understanding Ag. So we get to work with Sara quite often and refer to a lot of her work or knowledge in talking about nutrient-dense foods and advancing, human nutrition. So, Sara, I'm looking forward to your presentation this evening, and so are our participants. So I'm going to allow you to go ahead and get started if you're ready.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us tonight. I've had a lot of requests for this topic. And, the clients that I work with primarily are dealing with a lot of chronic diseases. And I see a lot of immune system dysfunction, digestive disorders. And so my concern with some of these products and what I want to really highlight tonight are the ingredients, what they're really made up of and how that can trigger some of these issues that people are dealing with. So I will dive in, and at the end we'll do a Q&A. So if you have any other questions, we'll go over that. So, I kind of naively believed that this whole thing with plant-based meats would become a fad and sort of die out over time when people learned what were really in a lot of these products. But turns out they're becoming really, really popular. And there is this worldwide rise, in plant-based meat companies. So this was a really interesting graphic that I stumbled across in my research. And, you see a lot of the kind of classic Boca Burger and the Morning Star. These guys have been around for a while. And then there's the Impossible Food and Beyond Meat brands that are a little newer. But I was also surprised to see that, the big meat companies, Tyson and Smithfield Food, they now have their own plant-based meat lines. And then there's companies like IKEA and Nestle that are also involved in this. Simple Truth is the Kroger brand. So again, they all have their own plant-based meat lines. So those are some of the ones I've highlighted there in yellow that you can see. And this one was kind of interesting. This brand here, Ruggenwalder, This is a German company, and they've been around since 1834. And their plant-based meat line is extremely popular now. So this is not just like a fad. These products are very appealing to consumers. So of course, being a clinician and seeing the kind of health problems that I'm seeing in my practice, I had to really look into this and see what is in these products and are they truly healthy. So I did also want to clarify that, this isn't going to be a big presentation on the cell-based meats. It's, mostly just going to be the plant-based meats that we talk about. This is a whole other topic, but these aren't really on the market quite yet anyway. I think there was a big splash recently with the headline about Singapore introducing some of the cell-based meats into their market. But these are coming, and these are already on the scene. Of course, a lot of the alternative dairy products are huge, and there's tons of companies involved in that space as well. And this is mostly, what we're seeing right now. If you go into your supermarket, right, you're seeing these plant-based meat cases next to the traditional meat cases. And these are actually pictures I took at my local supermarket. And I don't go in there too often, actually, especially, during COVID. I haven't been in there too frequently. And I get a lot of my stuff from local farmers, but I'll go in there from time to time for some odds and ends. And I was kind of surprised to see, this whole other case that popped up, this healthy alternatives, which is just filled with more plant-based meat products. So it's really catching on. This is what consumers are seeing, right? You guys are seeing this when you go into the stores as well. And people are just very curious about these products and trying them more and more. They're just getting more exposure to them too through restaurants and different fast food chains across the country. And we're seeing lots of headlines, right, all over the place about just how popular they are. They really did catch on, I think, during the pandemic. There was an issue, as a lot of you may know, with the big meat processors closing down for a while. And that kind of gave the plant-based meats even more of an opportunity to catch on with consumers. And they've been infiltrating the fast food chains, like I mentioned. And there's been some pretty interesting estimates about how much this market is going to be worth. Some say almost 140 billion in 10 years. And I think right now it's maybe, or a couple of years ago, it's estimated to be around 4 to 5 billion. So it's a growing market. And then that's Pat Brown there on the cover of Inc. magazine. So that's the CEO of Impossible Foods. And he was awarded a Company of the Year. So they're really also being glorified, and by a lot of these major media sources. Time magazine called them one of the 50 genius companies, and New York Times rated Impossible Burger the best tasting plant-based burger. So they've won awards also with food and beverage, and the UN gave an award actually to both Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods, one of their highest environmental honors, which was the Champions of the Earth Award in 2018. So it's all very interesting to me because I still feel like there hasn't been a lot of mainstream exposure on the nutritional quality of these products. And I think we need to see more of that. And their mission is very, very clear. And I don't think some consumers are actually aware of how aggressive their campaign is to replace animal foods within the food system. So both CEOs of Impossible Food and Beyond Meat have made it super clear that they want to make animals obsolete from our food system. And this is Impossible Foods' stated mission. This is right on their webpage. They were going to replace the use of animals as a food production technology globally by 2035. So not only is it their mission to rid our food system of animal products, they put deadline on it. They're determined to do it within the next 15 years. So, you know, Beyond Meat hasn't been quite as aggressive, I would say, with their mission, but, you know, they're concerned about human health and climate change and natural resources and animal welfare. And that's, you know, all part of their mission. And the question is, what's driving this consumer interest? And there's some interesting surveys that have been done by various organizations. This was done by Health Focus International. This was looking at plant-based food and beverages in general, not plant-based meat specifically. And you can see, you know, when they're asked to, when consumers are asked to rank the importance of these choices, health tops the list. You know, they believe these products will promote daily health, long-term health, prevention of disease, give more energy. So this is all directly related to health. And environmental sustainability reasons actually came at the bottom of this survey. And there's another survey done by Numerator, and they surveyed roughly 1,200 people that had tried plant-based meats before. And they asked them their 3 most important reasons that led them to trying it. And again, by and large, health is the biggest driver. So curiosity, I think, is you know, a part of the driver too. And you can see that here. People like new and novel things. So that's been part of the motivating factors. And vegans and vegetarians, you know, they're more likely to place value on environmental and ethical factors. But it's, you know, it's very clear that these companies aren't just targeting vegans and vegetarians, right? They're trying to convert people from eating meat to eating the plant-based meats. So I thought this was interesting that 95% of Impossible Foods customers are actually meat eaters. And there's, you know, you probably heard the term maybe flexitarian. So there's this whole idea that if we can be more flexitarian and eat plant-based meats or, you know, more plant-based foods part of the time and not meat all the time, there's this conception that, you know, we're going to help with climate change and conserving resources and whatnot. So this survey was done by foodinsight.org. They surveyed 1,000 participants. It was almost a 50-50 split between the number of people that had tried plant-based meats and some hadn't. And they were asked to determine which of the 2 products was healthiest, which they perceived as being more healthy, just based on the nutrition facts alone. So no ingredients list, just the nutrition facts. And, you know, one of the dead giveaways, if you know anything about the plant-based meats, is there's carbohydrates in this product. And of course, meat doesn't have any carbohydrates, right? So 45% said product A appeared healthier than product B. And, you know, just based on nutrition facts, there isn't a whole lot of difference, right? I mean, the calories are almost the same, the fat's almost the same, proteins, you know, almost the same, pretty similar. A few minor differences, but 45% went with product A. However, when they were asked again to rate the products that they thought were healthier after we included the ingredients, it was interesting to see that 40% still said the plant-based alternative looked healthier than the animal meat. So this is Impossible Foods ingredient list, and this is just 100% beef. So, you know, consumers, you know, some consumers probably perceive that plant-based meats are healthier alternatives. So despite, you know, such a long ingredient list, they would still go with this option if they do in fact think this is healthier than meat. But if we dig a little deeper, which the survey did, if we actually ask people why they chose that option, you know, the biggest reason was that they felt nutrition facts were more important than ingredients. And therein lies the problem with, you know, how consumers assess the nutritional quality of a product. And this is exactly opposite of what I try to teach my clients, my patients. I don't really care what the nutrition facts say. If you're not looking at the ingredients first and foremost to assess the nutritional value of that product, you're evaluating it in a completely wrong way. You know, it could have total junk ingredients, and the nutrition facts might look great. It might look low carb and have plenty of protein, but you really want to assess the ingredients first. So ingredients matter the most, in my opinion, as a clinician, as a nutritionist. And, you know, if we are to just look at each of these ingredients, this one is for Impossible Foods, this panel here, and this ingredient list is for Beyond Meat's burger. So the Impossible Burger, Beyond Meat's burger. And, you know, I'm not trying to just single these ones out, but they are the most popular in the market right now. So I really wanted to do a deep dive into their ingredients list. And, you know, from my perspective, as a nutritionist, a clinician, and helping people with some pretty chronic conditions, I have to be pretty meticulous with the way I assess these ingredients and make sure these things are things that aren't going to promote allergenicity and immune system reactions and digestive issues. And, you know, a lot of these foods are of concern to me. You know, when I really go through with a fine-tooth comb and just single out different ingredients, I can pick up on a few things that raise some red flags for me. So that's kind of how I wanted to approach this presentation, was to really go through and look at each ingredient and assess it. We can always do the comparison of, you know, how do these stack up to grass-fed beef, and I think it's great to make those kind of comparisons too. But for the purposes of this talk, I really just wanted to focus on what is actually in these foods. You know, what are these ingredients? Are they toxic? Do they contain toxins? How does our immune system react to them? So we'll start with soy. And soy is really controversial, right? I think we've all heard about the good things about soy, the bad things about soy. I thought I'd first give a little bit of a history about soy. And it's been around for a really long time, you know, thousands of years within Asian cultures. But one thing that I think is not widely understood is that soy was never like a staple food within Asian cultures. It's typically been eaten in smaller amounts, more like a condiment or an occasional meat replacement. So traditional forms of soy that they've eaten are tempeh, miso, natto, tamari, soy sauce. These are like fermented forms of soy. And of course, non-GMO, you know, forms of soy. So that's what we've seen within Asian cultures, and soy was really introduced to European cultures within the 1700s. And in North America, it was originally grown for animal feed. It didn't even really become widely consumed by Americans until the early 1900s. So this wasn't, you know, a staple food of ours by any means, at least within the Americas. And we've been eating these really altered forms of soy. So, you know, textured soy, protein isolates, you know, soybean oil, soy lecithin. Some of these ingredients just hide in a lot of foods. So these are not traditionally eaten forms of soy, right? And of course, there's the genetic modification of soy, which is another concern. So, you know, there's this idea that some people are probably more genetically adapted to soy because it's been in their culture for so long. And an example of that is actually dairy. You know, there's a high proportion of Asians that are lactose intolerant because they didn't always have cow's milk as part of their traditional cuisine. So that's something to consider as well, that it's a relatively new food to some cultures. But I'm not convinced that, you know, soy is inherently bad. I really do think it's the how we cultivate it, how we process it, that can make it a bad food for some people or cause some allergenicity for people. So, you know, how soy is grown and processed in and of itself, this is a huge topic. There's a lot we could say about the cultivation of soy, from, you know, how it's destructive to ecological processes, not good for soil, when it's grown in a monocrop, industrial sort of fashion, right? So when it comes to the pesticides that are used in that type of setting, there's actually been 14 total pesticide residues identified by the USDA pesticide data program. Among them, glyphosate is a really big problem, and Bt toxin that has some immunogenic properties that we'll talk about. But even just the processing of soy, you know, to take a soybean and to extract different compounds from it, like the proteins, you know, again, the protein isolates, the protein powders, the soybean oil. Hexane is a chemical solvent that's used throughout many stages within that process. So it's a really, really complex process, as you can see in this diagram. And so there's this hexane contamination that goes on. And, you know, hexane's a known neurotoxin to humans. There is some evidence that can cause damage to reproductive organs and fetal health. And there's no regulations for safe levels in soy. Independent testing has found about 50 parts per million hexane in some food products within the US. And that's more than 5 times Europe's safety threshold. So, you know, there's no regulations on this, on some of these things. Some studies have found that soy specifically has around 21 parts per million. And interestingly, fish protein isolates within the US is regulated as far as hexane and fish protein isolates. And it's supposed to be kept at 5 parts per million. So just to give you some perspective on, you know, what's supposed to be deemed safe for other foods, I mean, that's not being regulated again and monitored within soy. So when we do actually look at soy and some of the health concerns, again, it's very controversial. You will find some studies that say the phytoestrogens within soy, the isoflavones, cause endocrine disorders, you know, disrupt hormones, that they're correlated with certain cancers, particularly estrogenic cancers like breast cancer, and may be correlated with nervous system dysfunction. But then you'll find studies that contradict that. So again, I think a lot of it has to do with the individual and probably the processing of soy and also the amount of soy that one is consuming. But there's no question that soy contains a lot of these anti-nutrients. So what we call anti-nutrients are these naturally occurring compounds in a wide variety of plant foods. Grains, beans and legumes, nuts and seeds, nightshade vegetables contain some anti-nutrients. And what some of these nutrients do are actually to kind of like protect the plant from being consumed, you know, being overconsumed. They're not, you know, health compounds for animals, you know, and humans. So, you know, some of these anti-nutrients like goitrogens have been something really popular within my community, the integrative health community, you know, the goitrogens and their interference with thyroid function. And lectins and phytates are highly connected to autoimmune disorders and may cause some damage to the intestinal lining. So again, it's a matter of also the amount that you're consuming these foods and also how, in what fashion you're consuming them, because there is also this idea that the fermentation of certain foods can help lower the amount of anti-nutrients in these foods. You know, and like pressure cooking, for example, can actually destroy lectins. And fermentation can help lower the amount of the goitrogenic compounds too. One thing I find particularly concerning are these aquaporins. These are kind of like the new kids on the block when it comes to anti-nutrients. You may not have ever heard of these. And I just recently learned of them too when I started doing a lot more food sensitivity testing over the last couple of years. And aquaporins are associated with autoimmune disorders of the brain. And that's really alarming when you think about, you know, a lot of the cognitive issues that are on the rise, especially dementia and Alzheimer's. There's this blood-brain barrier, a barrier that kind of protects the brain from, you know, toxins within the bloodstream. And these aquaporins have a very striking resemblance to the AQR4 protein within that blood-brain barrier. And so if your immune system starts to react to aquaporins and attack them like a foreign invader and develop antibodies to them, there's this idea that it can also attack those AQ4 proteins within the blood-brain barrier. So, you know, this is definitely a valid concern, and, you know, one reason to most definitely limit or eliminate soy in the diet, depending on, you know, what your health issues are. And, you know, what concerns me most about soy is its allergenicity and immunological responses. This I had just learned fairly recently as well, that processing soy causes formation of unnatural proteins. So just through the whole process with the solvents, the hexane, you know, and isolating different compounds, there's actually the creation of a protein that doesn't naturally exist in soy called lysinoalanine. And we don't have enough evidence yet on whether this, you know, causes issues. Does the immune system respond to this like it's a foreign invader and attack it? And that immune system provocation is a really, really big concern for me. So I want to just briefly explain types of food reactions, because this also kind of sets the stage for some other things I'm going to explain about other foods, or other ingredients rather, in the plant-based meats, because food reactions occur in a lot of different ways. We have food intolerances, true food allergies, and then food sensitivities. And some of these, you know, get used interchangeably, and they really shouldn't. They're very distinct, different types of reactions in the body. And food intolerances, they don't involve an immune system reaction. A classic example, of course, is lactose intolerance, right? And that's where we basically lack a certain enzyme, the lactase enzyme, to break down lactose, and it causes digestive issues for people. But food allergies and food sensitivities do involve immune system reactions. And a lot of focus is placed on food allergies, like true food allergies. And when that happens, I think that downplays the allergenicity of certain foods. So you'll hear some statistics that, you know, oh, soy reactions, you know, soy allergy is a real problem, but only maybe a small percentage of the population has a true food allergy. And that might be true, but that's not looking at actual food sensitivities. And we can actually measure different antibodies in the bloodstream to see, you know, if you're having a reaction to a certain food. So I do utilize this type of testing in my practice. And if we see, you know, an IgE reaction, that's a true allergy. And you're usually going to have an acute, you know, almost immediate reaction to that within like an hour or two to that food. That would be a true food allergy, and it can be mild to severe. So mild would be like, you know, maybe you get some hives, maybe your throat gets a little itchy, tingling tongue. Those are kind of some common food allergy reactions that are very mild. But a severe reaction would be anaphylactic shock, right? So like a peanut allergy, that can result in anaphylactic shock. But what doesn't get discussed a lot are food sensitivities. And there is some literature out there now to tell us that if we can see an elevation in IgEs, IgAs, these two types of antibodies here, we still feel that that is an immune system reaction. And, you know, that's telling your body's not reacting well to that food. It's provoking inflammation. It could be connected to some symptoms that don't have an acute onset. So that's the difficulty with identifying food sensitivities unless you do some testing, because symptoms are often delayed. So they're hard to pinpoint or detect because of that. So I think a lot of people assume that if they eat a food and if they don't have some reaction like a gut issue or, you know, an anaphylactic reaction, that it's not provoking an immune system response, and that's not true. You could absolutely be having an immune system reaction to that food. It's just a delayed response. So think about any symptom you've had, you know, joint pain, headaches, migraines, skin issues, you know, autoimmune disorders for sure, you know, GI issues. Some of these could be related to foods that you're reactive to. And again, we don't really know that until we do some testing. IgA reactions are particularly concerning to me because about 70% of IgAs derive from the GI tract. So that tells me if I see someone who's pretty elevated in IgAs to a food antigen, then I know that food is probably causing some GI inflammation for them. So again, the allergenicity of soy is what concerns me when I think about the type of clients that I'm working with, because autoimmune issues are absolutely on the rise. And autoimmune issues, you know, are eczema, psoriasis, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, MS, rheumatoid arthritis, lots of different autoimmune issues. And it's essentially your body is attacking some of its own tissues. And autoimmunity is a very complex process. There are certain genetic factors that predispose people to developing autoimmune issues, but leaky gut is also implicated with autoimmune issues. So that's called intestinal permeability within the medical community. And there are ways to measure and assess that as well. So, if someone has certain genetics and also that combination of some leaky gut, and then certain environmental triggers, like a food allergen, then boom, you have the manifestation of an autoimmune disease. And it's not always going to be, though, these acute symptoms, to determine whether or not you have a soy allergy. But soy is definitely considered highly antigenic food and one of the 8 major allergens. So, when you're looking at food labels and you see at the bottom where it says may contain, milk or dairy or eggs or soy, food manufacturers are required typically to list if they have one of those allergens. Soy in the United States is almost entirely genetically modified. So like corn and other GM crops, they contain this cry protein, a crystal protein, and this is related to the Bt toxin. So this I can actually measure, with the testing that I do, and I utilize a lab called Vibrant Labs. So that's where I derive some of these graphics from. And this is actually a little, snippet from one of a sample test that they have. So we can actually measure elevated antibodies to certain peptides within the food that are from a genetically modified crop. And so this is always, a big red flag for me too when I see elevations in this, because then I know they're getting genetically modified food in their diet. Soy leghemoglobin. So we'll talk about this now. It's a very new GMO, and I think it's probably the most controversial of all the ingredients within the plant-based meats. And that is because it's such a new ingredient and it really hasn't undergone a lot of rigorous safety testing. So, this is Impossible Foods' sort of magic ingredient, right, that gives it its meaty flavor. It's meant to mimic the myoglobin or the heme in meat. And it is actually found naturally in the root nodules of soy plants. But it wasn't very sustainable for Impossible Foods to harvest it from the root nodules of the soy plants. So they found a way to just genetically engineer it. So essentially what they do is they take the DNA from the soy leghemoglobin and insert that into Pichia pastoris, which is the yeast that they use to grow it. It goes through a fermentation process. They feed the yeast, and then you have soy leghemoglobin. And that is also then used as an ingredient in the Impossible Foods products. So, it's this genetically modified yeast and this grown in this broth of chemically synthesized ingredients, all industrially manufactured, hugely concerning for me as a nutritionist to hear that people are consuming this. And we'll talk about the safety studies, but I thought this was an interesting little statement from Impossible Foods website when they were talking about using soy leghemoglobin. They realized it wasn't sustainable to harvest it from the roots because they didn't want to have to dig up soy plants that would promote erosion and release carbon stored in the soil. And it is thought that was sort of laughable, because I guess someone should let them know then that their industrial agriculture process for growing soy is definitely destroying soil. But soy leghemoglobin, there's this interesting little back and forth that happened with the FDA and Impossible Foods. And in 2014, Impossible Foods filed a GRAS notice with FDA, and GRAS is generally recognized as safe. Now, here in the US, food companies aren't really required to tell the FDA when they're introducing a new ingredient. But, Impossible Foods did so. They did file a GRAS notice, and they said they did so in the name of transparency. So in 2015, the FDA actually refused to approve the safety of SLH, the soy leghemoglobin, due to inadequate safety studies. So essentially, you know, with the GRAS certification, I mean, what that process is like is a food company will put together typically a panel of experts that they might choose and say, hey, let's assess this ingredient and see if it's safe. And there you go. And they can kind of put it on the market, but the FDA can always challenge them. But the FDA did refuse SLH in 2018, and Impossible Foods did some safety studies. They submitted a 1,000-page filing for GRAS with studies evaluating allergenicity, protein byproducts, and some rat safety studies on SLH. So the FDA looked at that information and they sent a no questions letter to Impossible Foods, meaning that it was essentially approved. A no questions letter just means, you know, that's it. No further evaluation needed, and you can go ahead and put your product onto the market. Now, the Center for Food Safety challenged that, and I do applaud them for doing so because, you know, when you really looked at the studies, I mean, obviously there was conflicts of interest, which they declared. The studies were conducted by employees of Impossible Foods, researchers and employees of Impossible Foods, and you know, and paid for, of course, by the company. So, you know, we don't have third-party studies that we're looking at, and it definitely goes a little deeper than that as well. The FDA did reject the objections made by the CFS, unfortunately. And if you go on the CFS website, you can see a lot of the articles that they've written about this controversy. But if we go a little deeper into the rat study, there was a really brilliant molecular geneticist, Michael Antonio, and he really critically analyzed this rat study. And he found what he called statistically significant, potentially adverse effects in the group of rats that were fed the soy leghemoglobin. So I did actually clip this directly from an article on GMO Science, and that article is titled "Rat Feeding Studies Suggest the Impossible Burger May Not Be Safe to Eat." And there's some important things to understand about this study. So aside from the conflicting interests, it's a short duration. It was only 28 days. These rats live for about 2 to 3 years. So this isn't always going to pick up on things that might happen later down the road, such as growth of tumors, you know, cancers that could develop, and autoimmune disorders. It's a very small sample size, so it's only 20 rats. And these were some of the things that Michael Antonio found. There were changes in blood chemistry, you know, decrease in red blood cells. Sometimes that's a sign of anemia, or damage to bone marrow that produces the red blood cells. Decrease in blood clotting ability, decreased blood levels of alkaline phosphatase, increased blood albumin, and that can indicate infection or damage to tissues, and decreased blood glucose and chloride. So, you know, again, he found some things that warrant more follow-up studies, but it makes you wonder how much the FDA really dug into this and really analyzed this, because these are some concerning things to consider. So pea protein, this is popping up in so many foods, and it's sort of being marketed as the healthy alternative now to soy protein because of all the issues with soy over the years. But it still has a lot of similar issues. So it does also contain some anti-nutrients. So like I mentioned, the anti-nutrients, you know, they're common in a lot of legumes. So peas are just another legume. So they have these lectins and phytates. I didn't list them all here, but they definitely, peas have some other anti-nutrients as well. You know, typically if we're eating peas, you know, a whole pea, and you're cooking it and you're just eating it as a side dish, you know, to accompany your meal, it's not a major concern. But when you're taking the pea and you're processing it to just extract the pea protein itself, and you're putting that in a product that's probably becoming a staple food for some people, right? They're going to be consuming large amounts of this. that's where it starts to raise another red flag for me, is what is the allergenicity of pea protein? And we are starting to see a rise in pea protein allergies. I read somewhere that pea protein allergies are actually pretty common in the UK. So I thought that was interesting, and I'm definitely seeing it more in clinical practice when I do some food sensitivity testing. The lectins, we can test for the antibodies to lectins, and that pops up from time to time. But, you know, looking at the isolation of these proteins is really important, because we have to consider that when you're extracting a protein, when you're isolating a protein from the whole food, not only do we have all the problems with the very processing of it itself and the hexane, but you're exposing your immune system to a compound in the food. You know, taken out of the context of the whole food, what does that do to our immune system? Does the immune system not recognize that as a food particle anymore? Just like I mentioned with the soy, you know, the processing of the soy and how that created this new protein that doesn't naturally occur in the soy. So, you know, we have to really ask what is going on with all these food allergies. And I truly believe a lot of it has to do with the processing of the food itself. And, you know, this headline here specifically kind of called out Beyond Meat burgers, saying they could pose a health risk to people with peanut allergies. You know, peanuts are not a nut, right? They're a legume. So this family of legumes, there's with the soy and the peanuts and peas, are allergenic for some people. And pea protein also has some issues with contaminants. This was a study done by the Detox Project, and they tested glyphosate levels in a few different brands, popular brands of pea protein. And what was surprising is that they found even the organic brands had pretty high levels of glyphosate contamination. So a lot of pea proteins are sourced from China and Canada. So we have to ask, you know, what's going on there with quality control, and how are these foods really being grown? And, you know, the organic industry really should do more testing, you know, within their supply chain. But these pesticides are also what promote, you know, drive some of this allergenicity. And one thing I think that's also important to remind consumers is that non-GMO doesn't mean glyphosate free. And a lot of people are getting that confused. They think that non-GMO means glyphosate free, and it absolutely does not. So non-GMO foods, ingredients like pea protein, can still be contaminated with a lot of different pesticides, not even just glyphosate. And I'm not going to dive too deep into glyphosate and the science behind glyphosate, but I'm sure a lot of you have heard of glyphosate, are familiar with it, and you've seen the work of Dr. Stephanie Seneff and Zach Bush, and you know, there's a lot of evidence that glyphosate does pose some real problems to humans and animals. But it is the active ingredient in herbicide Roundup. You know, for those of you who don't know, there's been a lot of lawsuits right now. You know, Bayer, who bought Monsanto, has had to pay out billions for those that were able to link their glyphosate exposure to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. But it's sprayed on a lot of crops, you know, corn, wheat, oats, beans, legumes. There was an article from Moms of America, and they did publish this data here about the glyphosate levels in Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat's burger. So they did send, Moms of America sent off samples to HRI Labs, an independent lab. And so they detected some fairly high levels within Impossible Burger. So none that came back within Beyond Meat, but again, if these companies aren't doing routine testing, you know, we don't know for sure if they don't have any glyphosate. This is just a one-time test, but a lot of companies should be doing routine testing, and you can actually do that now with the Detox Project. So they started their glyphosate residue-free program, and companies can submit 3 samples a year. They're required actually to submit 3 samples a year of their products, and then you get this glyphosate residue-free label. And it's also important to note that, you know, the US government allows nearly 6 times more glyphosate in our food than Europe. So it's really hard to assess what are safe levels. You know, how do we determine that? There's just so much conflicting evidence, and you have to dig through a lot of the science, and we just don't have studies. You know, we have our, you know, typically animal studies and epidemiological evidence to base it off of it when we're determining the safety of different pesticides and chemicals. So some of the other ingredients are the fats that I have some issues with, and canola and sunflower oil are what you can find in each of the popular plant-based meats, Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat's burger. Canola oil, a lot of us hopefully know about the problems with canola oil, but some still think it's a good source of omega-3s and tout it as a healthy fat. But it's also refined with chemical solvent hexane. And, you know, in the processing of canola oil, that actually does damage and oxidize the omega-3 fats and kind of turns them into these hydrogenated, just rancid fats. So whatever beneficial omega-3s might have been there in the first place are damaged through the processing of it. And it's important to point out that the omega-3s in canola oil are not EPA and DHA that you would get from fish or animal products. It's the alpha-linolenic acid. So, and most of us have very, very poor conversion of ALA into EPA and DHA. So human consumption, we can't just consume that ALA and convert it into EPA and DHA very easily. We do need to get some fish in our diet and grass-fed animal products. But sunflower oil, same thing, you know, hexane's used in the processing of it. It's actually quite high in omega-6s. So you can see a chart here on where different oils fall within the range of omega-6s and their omega-3 content. And I think it's worth noting that the refined coconut oil in some of these plant-based meats is chemically deodorized and bleached. So coconut oil is really, again, touted as one of those healthy fats. And, you know, it can be to some degree, but I think we have to be careful with the type of coconut oil. So refined coconut oil undergoes some processing. But the question that I would like to ask, and for those of you that have seen my previous presentation on the health benefits of pasture-raised meats, I really talked a lot about omega-3s and 6s. And I would be curious to know what is the omega-6 to 3 ratio of plant-based meats. We do know that some, you know, studies have looked at grass-fed beef. It has a really good ratio of 2 to 1. It just depends on, you know, what you're looking at, but there's certain studies that have found a pretty good ratio. So this is just a little infographic to kind of explain to those who don't know, you know, omega-3s and 6s, they're essential fatty acids that we absolutely need to get in our diet. Our body cannot synthesize these type of fats. And I kind of don't like that this diagram makes omega-6s look like they're pro-inflammatory. They are necessary fats. However, the problem is that most of us get way too many omega-6s in our diet. And this promotes inflammation. And when you have an imbalance with these fats, and ideally we would want them within, you know, as close to a 1-to-1 ratio as possible. And that's something that I do in my practice as well, as measuring omega-3 and 6s in clients. So you can see a lot of the sources there. And again, these are just some of the chronic conditions that are driven by inflammation. And when you have this imbalance with those fats, that just turns on more inflammation in the body. So other additives, you know, when you're looking at ingredients, you'll see that the main ingredients listed first, of course, right? And then you'll see the 2% or less, contains 2% or less. And so people are sometimes quick to dismiss that. So it doesn't constitute very much as part of the total ingredients, but it still matters. These additives are extremely important to look at. Again, especially when we're talking about people with inflammatory issues and immune system issues. So again, looking at the labels of some of these plant-based meats, I just wanted to go through a few of these one by one. Yeast extract. often contains MSG. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of MSG. It's a flavor enhancer, so it's like salt on steroids, but it's a chemical. You know, it's chemically made, and it's associated with headaches and neurotoxin and increased blood pressure, again, allergic reactions, so allergenicity. And in mice, it's definitely been shown to cause some inflammation, even type 2 diabetes, drive weight gain, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is a big concern in industrialized countries. You know, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, especially within the US, is really, really on the rise, and even in children. And we think that's largely driven by too much sugar and carbohydrate consumption, as well as toxins. So cultured dextrose is basically sugar that's cultured with bacteria, but it has been linked to digestive issues as well. So, you know, again, none of these are naturally occurring. They all undergo some sort of processing. Modified food starch typically comes from corn, but it can come from some other sources too, potatoes or tapioca. It's treated with chemicals, chlorine or potassium permanganate, sodium hypochlorite acids. So it sometimes does hide MSG. Modified food starch could be about 10% maltodextrin. And I'm sure a lot of you, if you've looked at food labels, you've seen maltodextrin in a lot of products as well. But this has definitely been associated with some allergic symptoms like rashes, itching, asthma. And these are two of the other additives that I thought I'd mention. Methyl cellulose. That one got some attention as far as people singling that out as one of the bad ingredients in plant-based foods because it is a known laxative. So it can cause some GI issues for people. But it's used as an emulsifier in a lot of foods. But we have seen in animal studies that it may promote colon cancer. And that's at levels typically present in processed foods. So meaning that they're not even feeding them an exorbitant amount of it. They're just feeding them the equivalent of what we would find in processed foods, that, 2% or less sometimes. And we know that it can turn on some inflammation within the gut. And natural flavors, there's really nothing natural about them at all. They're lab synthesized, they're super processed. They could be another hidden source of MSG. And what's, I think, really, sneaky for some manufacturers, they don't even have to disclose where their natural flavors come from at all, or how they're really processed. And the FDA's definition of natural flavors is very interesting. The term natural flavor or natural flavoring means the essential oil, oleoresin, essence, or extractive, protein hydrolysate, distillate, or any product of roasting, heating, enzymolysis, which contains the flavoring constituents derived from a spice, fruit, vegetable. You get the point. Like, it's basically, they can take any natural compound and just kind of chemically alter it. And there you go. It's still a natural flavor. So I think it would be interesting to ask, those participants of the other study, if they knew more about the ingredients, if they had maybe watched this presentation or just even read up on a few of those ingredients and did a critical analysis, would they still choose product A? Would they still choose that, knowing some of the health problems with a lot of these ingredients? And again, this isn't really even just to single out Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat. A lot of these plant-based meats, you can look at the ingredients. They're all very, very similar. They use soy or pea protein. They have a lot of these additives. They have to, fortify them with synthetic nutrients. So I think it's really important that we ask a lot of questions about ingredients. I think, what we're seeing in the functional medicine community and the integrative health community is a lot of immune system dysfunction. I know I've mentioned that a lot throughout this webinar because it's a huge concern. It's on the rise, and a lot of people aren't associating it with these ingredients. So if you guys haven't seen the movie Secret Ingredients, I highly recommend you watch that. It's a really fabulous film that dives into the GMO topic and watches what happens when families switch to a more organic diet and the health changes, the beneficial health changes they see. So, yeah, that's it.
Well, Sarah, another amazing job. I mean, I kind of feel like I've been drinking from a fire hose here. Listen to all your fabulous information. I mean, and a very relevant topic. I mean, too often people, you know, they buy something thinking, you know, it's been regulated by multiple entities. And, you know, the fact is a lot of times, you know, the regulation standards aren't what we perceive.
Right.
And,
exactly.
you know, it was kind of interesting. You made a comment about, you know, how they're isolating some of these proteins from the whole part of the food and how that's starting to create issues. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's kind of like the same thing in, you know, in production agriculture. You know, we start isolating one single thing, all the cascading events that occur. And I mean, it's a phenomenal correlation that you brought up there. So thank you for doing that. So, you know, we got several questions here, so I think we'll just dive in and get started. Right. So Virginia asks, I don't understand about the anti-nutrients. Are they found naturally in plants that we consume? And her next question is, how would we know?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, they are, they're naturally occurring in a lot of foods. Like I mentioned, they're in grains and beans and legumes and nuts and seeds. You know, preparing foods in a certain way can help reduce those anti-nutrients. And also, this is why I encourage variety a lot. You know, when people eat the same thing all the time, you're exposing yourself to the same compounds all the time. But fermentation can help to reduce some of those anti-nutrients. Soaking, sprouting, you know, I'm sure a lot of people have seen like nuts that have been soaked. You know, when you soak beans before you cook them, you can also help remove some of the phytic acid. Pressure cooking is known to completely destroy lectins. But, you know, some of the things like the aquaporins that I mentioned are the ones that are really concerning. And, you know, I just, like I said, more recently learned about those, and there's no way to destroy them. And they do occur in a handful of foods that we're aware of, spinach, tomatoes, soybeans. And I think it has a lot to do with what's happening with the gut as well. So, you know, how would you know? You can do, like if you want to know how if you're reacting to any of them, you can always do food sensitivity testing. But, you know, anti-nutrients, I could always send some resources, but you can learn about the anti-nutrients in different foods and just learn ways to properly prepare them so that it reduces the anti-nutrient load or destroys them.
Thank you. The next question is from Willie. Are the anti-nutrient levels evident in GMOs as well non-GMO soy products? Are the levels different in GMO and non-GMO soybeans?
Second part of that question, that's a good question. For the first part, yes, you will see anti-nutrients in GMO and non-GMO. I don't know how much they would differ, like if there's more in the non-GMO form. Yeah, I don't know if there's anyone on this webinar who's an expert on that, but I'd like to know. I'd have to look into that. Yeah, but you're going to find those in organic foods too.
And then another part of the question that that Willie asks here, am I correct that the extraction process of the plant protein from soy and peas makes a major contribution to the anti-nutrient content that finds its way to these plant-based meats?
Yeah. So when you're extracting the plant proteins, like the phytates and the lectins, those are part of the proteins. So you're basically increasing the amount of some of the anti-nutrients that you're getting had you just eaten like the whole, you know, like edamame, right? Or had eaten it in its whole form, or the tempeh or what have you. You know, so yeah, you're essentially exposing yourself to more of the anti-nutrients when they're the protein containing anti-nutrients. Yeah.
Karen's got a question here for you. Secret Ingredients, the movie you refer to, is that on Netflix or another platform?
Oh, it's a good question. I usually send out a link because I have my clients watch that as one of their homework assignments. And I usually just send the link to the website, Secret Ingredients. I think at one point it was on Amazon. I don't remember though, but if someone wants to do a search and check and see if it's on Netflix or Amazon, I think it's only available to stream through their website though, if I remember correctly. That's the film that was done by Jeffrey Smith, and I'm blanking on the other, the person who co-directed with him, but Jeffrey Smith, a lot of people know he's written books, Seeds of Deception, and activist against GMOs.
Super. Bobby's got a question here. A true comparison would be between these plant-based meats that you're focusing on and factory farm meat, including pigs, cows, and chickens, who also eat the GMO feed. Also, the comparison between the healthy veggie burger and grass-fed beef would be more appropriate. His comment is, this presentation skews the viewer's consumer to believe that meat is better than an alternative option. We can go into that a little bit. And I know we've got several panelists on here too that I think would like to chime in, but I'll let you go ahead and take a shot at it real quick, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, what I didn't want to make this webinar about is attacking plant-based diets. You know, I have some clients that are plant-based. I collaborate with a doctor that's very plant-based. I'm not anti-plant-based diets, but I think if you are going to choose that type of lifestyle, what it's about is choosing foods that are whole foods. You know, why do we need to eat these ultra-processed, industrial plant-based meats? So if you're looking for, you know, why would you look for a healthier alternative to regeneratively grazed beef? In other words, you know, it's that there is none. Just eat that. But,
Absolutely.
you know, right? It's there's no alternative to that. But if you want to adopt a plant-based diet, you know, do that with whole foods. Do that with whole, real, organic foods.
Absolutely.
And if that's answering that question,
Well, I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword. I think you did a great job. I mean, you were just informing, you know, what are in these, you know, these Impossible Burgers, you know, and some of the precautions we need to be aware of. Alan, Dr. Williams, are you on the line? I know you're driving this evening. I would like your opinion on this. I'm hoping he's in cell range, maybe not.
I think part of the question too was, you might need to repeat it because it's a long question, something about feeding, you know, the animals, the GMOs.
GMOs, correct.
Right. I mean, and of course, I as a clinician, as a nutritionist, would not recommend that by any means. You know, you want animals that are pasture raised. And if you're going to do a plant-based diet, you want foods that are of good quality too. So that's kind of the direction I think I would steer people, is just towards whole, real food. It's really that simple. Whole, real food. And animals that were given a natural diet.
Be able to self-select their diet. That's probably more like it.
Yeah.
And stuff. So Willie's got another question here for us. What is your opinion on laboratory produced meat?
Really freaky. It's really scary. I don't know. The whole concept of it just grosses me out. And I need to learn more about it, to be honest, to really give you the best opinion about it. It's just, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, it's a scary new, I mean, we don't know nothing about it. That's the problem.
Yeah, we don't have any, we have no safety studies on it, right? There's no safety studies at all, at least that I'm aware of. So if anybody knows about that, please chime in, because I don't know what we know about the safety of it. There's Carl, I know you're on this webinar. He just told me that you know, there's an antibiotic kind of bath that it has to I think he just may have chimed in. But anyway, there's the antibiotics that are used as part of it, so that can't be healthy. I don't know. Let's see.
Gabe, I know Gabe Brown's on the line, and Gabe's always never lost for words. So, Gabe, would you like your opinion on this?
Thank you, Shane. I just want to add the work that Understanding Ag is doing with Dr. Stephen Van Vliet, Dr. Fred Provenza, Dr. Scott Kronberg, using a mass spectrometer to measure phytonutrients. And Dr. Van Vliet can measure over 2,300 different phytonutrients. And those are critical for human health. Well, where do the phytonutrients come from? It comes from a very diverse diet. So in answering the question about laboratory produced meat, how are those meats going to have the wide variety of phytonutrients that are available to an animal that's out there grazing, say, for example, 100 different plant species? Well, it's simply, there'll be no comparison. And watch for future information on this, because we are at the current time working with Dr. Van Vliet, as I said, to compare just what the earlier question was about. What is the difference between a grass finished protein compared to a confinement finished protein? Doesn't matter what species it is. Well, the work that's been done so far shows clearly that the more diverse the diet, the more of these phytonutrients that will be available. And I think that's a simple answer to the question. Now, we're going to be doing more research on that, and we look forward to getting the results, because we really think that'll be a game changer in answering this question, whether it be plant-based meat or lab-produced meat.
Shane, can you hear me?
Yes, Alan, we can hear you now.
Okay. First of all, Gabe is exactly right, and we've got to use a little common sense here. It is the height of human scientific arrogance and hubris to believe that we can design truly nutrient-dense, healthy foods in a laboratory. That just cannot be done. And we see this in TMRs, designing TMRs for animals. We're experiencing enormous amounts of health problems in animals in CAFOs fed TMRs. It's an absolute fact that they have far more health issues. That they have decreased longevity, a lot of metabolic disorders, all kinds of pretty scary issues compared to animals that are raised in a more natural system, as Gabe was talking about, out on pasture, but not just monoculture pastures, highly diverse pastures. That diversity in diet and those phytonutrients is absolutely crucial. The metabolomic analysis that's been done by Dr. Stephen Van Vliet at Duke University School of Medicine has clearly shown that when you compare an Impossible Burger to grass-fed beef, there is a 85% difference in nutrient density, 85% difference in nutrient density in favor of the grass-fed hamburger. And the research, the metabolomic research, is continuing to find massive differences in many other food products of the same magnitude. So there's no doubt what we're seeing here. And Sara, from prior research, the most nutrient dense food out there, period, are animal organ meats. There are no plant-based foods that can come close to touching the nutrient density of animal organ meats. Now, do plants have a place in our diet? Absolutely. But as Sara said and Gabe said, we need to be eating whole foods. And to take parts and parcels of plant-based foods to put into a highly processed manufactured food product is completely destroying even the value of a plant-based diet.
Great points, Alan. Thank you for replying and commenting back. We're going to keep moving here, Sarah. We've got quite a few questions coming in. Lynn asked, will this be recorded to watch again? Yes. She comments, astonishing amount of information.
Good.
Yes, it is. Next question. I feel that the reason people buy into the idea that plant-based meats are healthier reached that conclusion because of all the propaganda and false information favoring plant-based meats. I wanted your thoughts on why the big meat producers don't proactively challenge these claims and promote the benefits of eating natural beef.
I don't know. That's actually something I've been curious about too, and they're kind of just joining the crowd by producing their own plant-based meat lines. So,
well, obviously, it's financially motivated. I mean,
right. But
that's
why don't the big meat producers fight back against the propaganda? I guess they just want to get in on the profits, right? And not defend their own industry. I don't know.
That's a great question.
No,
I mean, go ahead, Gabe.
If I may.
Yes.
Think about it for a minute. The majority of the largest beef producers own captive supply, and they're actually in the business of marketing yardage and selling cheap feedstuffs. Okay. Could it be that they know that the beef that they're raising is not high in these phytonutrients itself? And as Alan has said in the past, don't think for a moment that if they could invest in plant-based meats or lab meats and make more money, that they wouldn't do that. And that's why they are investing. Okay. So I think the question, although a good one, needs to be phrased, well, why don't the producers who raise pastured proteins take this on? And the answer to that is exactly what Understanding Ag and Dr. Van Vliet, Provenza, and Kronberg are doing. We are doing that testing, and that's how we're going to respond, is with the science behind what those tests show.
Great point, Gabe. Great point. That's why that's so critical for people to capture your knowledge, Sara, your information about this. So thank you. Will has a question here. Do you have an opinion on nutritionally density of food? Has the density declined from 20 to 30, 40 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting studies about that. And Gabe, you have some of that in your book. I think it's like we'd have to eat 10 oranges or something like that now to equal the orange we would have had a couple generations ago. So yeah, I mean, I could always pass along some studies on that if you're interested. But yeah, there's evidence that we've had a decline in nutrient density in our food. But we still got a lot of nutrient density in the animal meats and the organ meats. That's what Alan was referring to in my last webinar, my last presentation. I mean, organ meats are still off the charts high in so many different nutrients. So if you work some of those into your diet, along with other foods, even if nutrient density has declined in other foods, you're going to help really increase that nutrient density. Not just organ meats, certain things like oysters, that people don't eat a lot. Oysters are incredibly nutrient dense. so certain seafood. But yeah, I mean, food that we cultivate and grow, I mean, how could it not decline, with what we've done to our soil?
Yep, correlation with soil health. Great presentation. Can you please say more about how emulsifiers, guar, gum, and non-dairy milks and other food items break down the gut lining? Or correct me if I'm misinformed. Thank you.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting topic, because there's some concern that these emulsifiers have almost like this scrubbing effect on the cells within the epithelial layer. So all of your cells kind of have this phospholipid bilayer, and these emulsifiers can sort of break down some of that cell membrane. So that's kind of like my basic understanding of it. But yeah, the guar gums, the carrageenan, and I think the carrageenan was in Beyond Meat's product and they took it out. But both the Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat's products have the methyl cellulose. And same thing with all the other plant-based meat companies. They all have some kind of emulsifiers and the thickeners and things like that. So, but yeah, it's there. And then I think there's just with carrageenan itself, there were some rat studies, I think, that were done that showed that promoted cancer. And so I don't quite remember the mechanism there. I'd have to go back to reading that study, but it just promotes some sort of inflammatory process. So anything that's going to promote inflammation could damage the cell membranes, the gut lining. Your gut lining is one cell layer thick, and it doesn't take much at all to damage that. It could be toxins, just poor diet, genetically modified organisms, too many antibiotics, chronic stress, lots of things that can damage the gut lining. So, and these additives are no different.
Got another question here. My concern is the amount of sodium in these products. They can be a cause for, I'm thinking she's saying, for high blood pressure.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct.
Yeah, and pea protein, that's one thing I actually didn't bring up about it, but it is really high in sodium. It's naturally occurring sodium in it. So that's some of the criticism that some of the plant-based meat companies have gotten, that their products are really high in sodium just because of the pea protein. And there's a lot of things that drive hypertension. So I think sodium's kind of, gotten a bad rap for causing high blood pressure. And I don't think it's just sodium alone. That's one of the drivers. But, hypertension is really when your vascular lining, your vascular tissues really lose that elasticity, and that's very inflammation driven. So anything that's going to inflame the body can drive hypertension. Even not having enough omega-3s, that's highly correlated with hypertension. So, but sodium is one, it's not to be totally dismissed. Too much sodium in the diet can definitely drive up blood pressure, but it's not just sodium alone.
It's never singular, is it?
Nope. Never that easy.
Ken's got a question for us. Sara, you flagged mung beans as an ingredient concern. Would the concern be similar to pea protein?
Yeah, I saw that in the chat. I was going to reply. Yeah, the ingredient label kind of wrapped around. It's supposed to be mung bean protein. So yeah, just any kind of isolated protein is a little bit of a red flag for me. And I mean, you're going to see some isolated proteins in different foods from time to time. I mean, if you're eating a whole food diet, you're not, but we're all going to eat some processed packaged foods from time to time, and you'll see these things pop up. But I just worry about people eating that as like a daily kind of staple, and exposing your body to that all the time. And for people that already have health issues, you don't want to be consuming any of that because of the potential allergenicity.
Ike's got a question here. How about grain-fed animals that get fed that isn't sprayed with glyphosate and are not implanted? We still see the omega-6 to 3 ratios really get out of whack on grain-finished animals.
Exactly. Yeah, they're still not getting all those phyto chemicals from a diverse diet, and yeah, they're still going to have a skewed omega-6 to 3 ratio to some degree, you know. Yeah.
You know, a great book, you know, for livestock producers is Dr. Fred Provenza's book, Nourishment. It
Yeah.
really goes into a lot of the subject matter and explanation. I always found that a very intriguing read, emphasizing the importance of diversity in the diet.
That's a book for livestock producers and healthcare practitioners.
Absolutely.
That's a book for everybody. Everyone needs to read that book. But yeah, it's back to one of the comments earlier about, you know, why isn't there more pushback from the big meat companies? I mean, why isn't there more pushback from people in my field? And I think, you know, I've asked myself that question because I think that's really important. I really want to see more healthcare practitioners and nutritionists speak up about this. And, you know, I think they underestimate, you know, the popularity and, you know, how much traction some of the plant-based meat companies are gaining. Because like I said, I thought it was just going to kind of be a fad thing and people would catch on to it and, you know, but
No, it's everywhere.
that's everywhere.
Bob's got a comment and question, I think, here. I went non-dairy and have been using coconut oil. What should I use instead of butter? He's got a second part of the question here, so if you want to answer that one first.
Oh, instead of butter? Well, I mean, if you're just trying to avoid dairy, you can use animal fats. It depends on what you're trying to use it in. I mean, if you're looking for like a really stable fat, you know, that holds up well under high heat and cooking, you know, I cook with bacon fat. And so, you know, lard is great. Tallow is good. Tallow is wonderful. And I'm not, you know, totally against coconut oil by any means. I think it's the refined coconut oil that's a concern. But, you know, I try to really keep my diet as local as possible. You know, we're all going to have some things like coffee and chocolate and avocados and stuff like that that doesn't grow locally. But if there's something that I don't need to eat, like coconut products, you know, that come from tropical regions, I try to eliminate it in my diet for that reason. But yeah, I think those are all good alternatives. Did he say again what he was using the coconut oil for, or the?
No, he did not, but he has got a second part here. He's mentioning, Bob says, I took a Spectra cell micronutrient blood test after you talked this spring. I wanted to retest after 6 months, but their cost has skyrocketed. Would Vibrant Labs be a better option?
Oh, who's asking this question?
Bob.
I feel like, Bob, do I know you? Yeah, so that's been a really controversial topic in my community. And if there's any of my fellow clinician friends that I invited on this talk, they're all laughing right now because it's been a big problem. Yeah, unfortunately, the rates of Spectra cells tested go up, but you know what? It's really not any more expensive than the other tests. Vibrant Labs, it's not the same test. They do offer a micronutrient test, but it is not, it's a totally different methodology. So they're taking like a direct measurement of the nutrients within the white blood cell. They're essentially lysing, you know, bursting open the white blood cell and measuring the nutrients in it. Whereas SpectraCell's test is a functional test. They're taking living cells and culturing them over several weeks and assessing. It's sort of an indirect measurement of nutrient status in a nutshell. Anyway, it's totally different methodology. Not the exact same type of test. So if you really want to retest, I mean, to be most accurate, just go through SpectraCell. I mean, get another SpectraCell test done because you're not comparing apples to apples if you do the test with Vibrant. Two very different tests.
Thank you. Stefan's got a link here, I think, to the Secret Ingredient documentary on Amazon.
Very cool.
So,
Thanks, dear.
So yes. David, are you concerned that so many in the natural food industry are unquestionably accepting these highly processed substances?
Yeah, exactly. It's like we discussed. I mean, I'm just kind of floored at the number of people that are just, you know, I don't know. You have to really ask, what are you, what are you, what are you backing in the end and why? What are their motives? So I know that, within my field of integrative healthcare practitioners, where we're looking at health from a very, very different perspective from conventional medicine, we're very concerned. We talk about these products and how they're just, not promoting health at all. But when I see other people out there really promoting them, I just have to ask, I have to wonder, what are their motives? I don't know. It does concern me. Definitely.
So we got the big meat producers are redefining themselves as protein companies because plant-based proteins have much higher profit margins. Cargill is one of the largest investors in both plant-based and cultured stem cell proteins. So there's a comment brought to us tonight from Stefan. Going through here. Sara, your graphics are jam-packed with great information and so visually educational. Great job.
Thank you. I was worried I was going to make it too basic, so I'm glad people got a lot out of it. I have to try to find that fine balance with not making it too overwhelming, but giving people enough information. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Gina's got a question here, and something we keep seeing more and more of. What are your thoughts on oat milk?
Oh, God. I was just talking to a client about this yesterday. Well, I don't see very many organic brands, and we know that oats are definitely, a lot of oats are contaminated with glyphosate, right? And especially here in the US. So, I personally am reactive to dairy. I love dairy, but, I can't really eat a lot of dairy. So I'm always trying to find really healthy alternatives to it. And I like to just switch around to different things, but oat milk is just, I haven't even tried it actually. So I don't know. I just don't like the fact that I can't find any that are organic. So.
Well, I can't say that I have either, Sara. So we'll keep moving on here. Okay, I think this is going to be a question for some of our panelists here. Bobby poses a question or thought. Pasture proteins will not be able to feed the vast majority of the world population. Therefore, in my opinion, whole food, plant-based diets will be more sustainable and healthier for the vast majority of the population. And I'm going to call on Alan. Did you capture that question, Alan, or able to speak?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we sure can.
Okay. Well, quite bluntly, that is not true. We have done exhaustive studies looking at what it takes to produce animal proteins, and the truth of the matter is, if we just look at beef, and we could do the same for all of the other proteins, but I'm going to use beef as the example tonight. If we just look at beef, presently in the U.S. today, we are harvesting a total of 30 million head of feedlot finished animals a year in the U.S. to meet demand. And what we know from our analysis is that right now, without taking away public grasslands, BLM land, U.S. Forest Service land, anything like that, that just using privately owned grasslands in the U.S. that are significantly underutilized at this point in time, we could start next year producing more than 50 million head of grass-finished animals. So we could almost double the current amount of production without doing any grain-fed beef whatsoever. And the same is true in many other countries of the world. So that statement is just not true. And when we do multi-species production, which many regenerative farmers are doing today, we can actually far outproduce current animal protein production in the CAFO sector.
Gabe, would you like to comment on that any at all? Or any other panelist?
Nothing to say beyond what
Shane.
Ellen did. It's pretty clear that there just is no issue with pastured proteins being able to satisfy the demand.
Absolutely. Ray, you had a comment?
Shane,
Yes,
yes, and just to add to Alan, it is well known and it's well documented that 70 to 80% of the world is being fed with small acres, less than 12 acres. So that's not a true statement that we've been all fed and taught. And Alan's right. We can easily feed the world. And by the way, the world population is going down. So the world can be fed and easily fed. And so currently 70 to 80% of the world is fed with small acres anyway.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ray. We're going to keep on trucking here. So Bob's got another question and comment here. Sara, you are my hero. We don't know each other. So I guess you don't know Bob, Sara, but maybe someday we'll get the opportunity to introduce you to. He says, thank you. He was commenting, though, I am down 20 pounds since your earlier talk.
Oh, wow.
Down 40 pounds for the year. Yay. COVID-19, no fast food, eating whole food products now. Coconut oil was just being used for baking. No need to answer, just updating my situation. But thanks for clarifying there, Bob.
Yeah, bravo. That's opposite of what's happened to a lot of people, right? They've unfortunately gained weight through COVID and a lot of stress and people have still been eating out sometimes. Yeah, so good for you.
Absolutely. So I'm going through here looking for a couple more questions. We have to restore grasslands with grazing to mitigate global warming. Anyway, even if we don't eat. You know, I think Seth's just trying to make a comment. You know, it's critical, the animal component. That's what built these soils. And it's critical to get this animal grazing component back out here in these landscapes. And that's one thing at Understanding Ag we really promote heavily, and we really work with producers, teaching them how to properly graze, you know, their grasslands and, you know, and how to stimulate the microbiology in the soils to help build nutrient-dense plants that are livestock can eat. When land is regenerated, the carrying capacity is greatly increased. All the not enough land assessment never accounts for grazing management increasing carrying capacities on what currently very degraded land. You know, and Stefan brings up a great point. You know, as we start doing proper grazing techniques on our landscapes, you know, we're going to increase the amount of biomass that those landscapes, you know, produce, which is also going to help add, you know, more pounds of livestock per acre potentially, you know. But when we start looking at people like Alejandro, you know, what he's done in the Chihuahuan desert, you know, restoring grasslands back in that desert environment, I mean, and just applying the principles is what he did, and educated himself on how to move the animals correctly. You know, think of the millions of acres we have that are desert, you know, in the southwestern part of the United States. That once was a grass savanna. So, I mean, there's a lot of encouragement here that we can, you know, not only restore, you know, ecosystems, but, you know, start restoring, you know, nutrient-dense foods and, you know, the human diet. You know, I'd like for you to just make a quick comment, Sara, as we kind of get wrapped up here. You know, we talk a lot about the gut, you know, the lining inside the gut. Mm-hmm. And that thin, you said it was 1 cell in thickness. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I don't think people realize what a width of a cell is. You're talking about a micron, 1 to 2 microns in size.
Yeah.
And I mean, and just how fragile that is, and how, and when we do, you know, eat certain foods and products, how devastating that could be to that just very thin layer. Protection mechanism is what it is. Could you maybe expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah, I'm looking for a graphic right now. I use this all the time when I'm talking to clients. I think I used this one in my last webinar. But you have, you know, the lining itself, and you have a mucosal layer as well. Let me pull this up. Can you guys see this? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, this is just so foundational to a lot of everything with health, you know, when we're looking at different health issues, but especially when, you know, I'm talking about autoimmunity and that kind of thing. But this is, you know, this is the one cell layer that we're talking about. And then you have, there's actually a couple different mucosal layers here. And, you know, this is when I talk about that immunoglobulin A, that IgA, that's secreted by some of this mucosal tissue. And, you know, this mucosal layer here kind of houses some of the microbes, the beneficial microbes. So this is what you'd see in a healthy gut, you know, this intact gut lining and a healthy mucosal layer. This is much thicker, you know, within the colon, but you have this layer both within the small intestines and within the colon. And just over time, this just kind of degrades through various things. I mean, it shouldn't, but it does when we're exposed to poor diet and toxins and, like I said, stress. You know, you just have these pathogenic bacteria, and some of which secrete these lipopolysaccharides, LPS. And these are endotoxins. These are toxins that are produced within the body that really create a lot of damage. And when they start leaking into the bloodstream, you know, that just really sets off this inflammation for people. So walking someone through like a gut healing process is, can be quite complex, you know, because when we're talking about healing somebody's digestive tract, you got to look at everything from upper GI function. Are they making enough stomach acid? How's their enzyme production? Do you have good bile flow? You know, you're breaking down your fats. You know, what's going on with your microbiome? Do you have an overgrowth of bad bacteria that's contributing to all this? Then we have to work on nourishing this whole layer right here with the small intestines, and glutamine is an amino acid that can do that, but there's a specific bacterial species called Akkermansia that helps to fix this degraded mucosal layer. So there's certain species of bacteria that play a role in repairing the gut lining and the mucosal tissue. So yeah, this is one of my favorite things to talk about, as you can tell.
That's a great slide. I mean, that just shows how complicated it is and how fragile it is, and, you know, being cautious of our diet.
It's something I thought about throwing into this presentation again, because, you know, this is just, here you go. This is the gateway that opens up all the problems. So you got all those isolated proteins, you know, and these unusual kind of peptides that are just leaking into the system and triggering that inflammation. So, you know, you combine those two together, and then that's when you run into some trouble.
Absolutely. Well, we got some more questions and comments coming in here, Sarah.
Okay.
You know, there was a comment, you know, there was questioning your opinion on bacon fat being better than coconut oil.
Well, what's the challenge?
Well,
First,
I'm not questioning.
It's tastier, right? I think we can all agree on that.
You know, I like Russell Hendrick's comment. God had a good day when he developed pork. I mean,
there you go. Yeah, I mean, it's from a saturated fat standpoint, and just thinking, I was thinking the original question was about, you know, what's another healthy oil to cook with aside from, coconut oil. And so you would want to cook typically with more saturated fats, especially under higher heat. So it's just a great tasty fat to cook with. But, you know, obviously from healthy, I think kind of goes without saying, but, you know, with this crowd, but I think you guys know when I'm talking about pork and bacon, healthy pasture raised pig, you know, no nitrates, you know, no bacon nitrates and all that. So yeah.
Kent Solberg just chimed in. He says, you know, bacon's kind of like the duct tape of the kitchen. It makes everything
exactly
work. It fixes anything. So
when I get people started on liver pate, I make them put a bunch of bacon in it and, you know, blend that up. And that's kind of like the starter pate recipe.
That's the starter recipe.
Yeah.
And that's got a comment and a kind of a question here. Is there a chance to get your type of nutritionist into hospitals and care homes? I feel that no one will get better with the food. Most comes in package. Anything being done in schools, hospitals, or care homes?
Yeah.
Usually a clinical nutritionist.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different, as you all know, there's a lot of different schools of thought when it comes to nutrition and what's really optimal. And, typically the type of practitioner or clinician that would be employed in a hospital setting is a registered dietitian. And this isn't to disparage registered dietitians by any means, but traditionally RDs are taught a different type of, they're given a different type of education. It's kind of like the old school theories around food and nutrition, and that saturated fat is bad, and they don't have a more integrative perspective. And that's not true for all RDs. I mean, Diana Rogers is an RD and she's amazing. Some break away from that crowd and they go a different direction and learn some more of the things we're talking about within integrative medicine. But yeah, it's tough, because those type of settings also, they like a hospital will usually only employ an RD. And me as I'm a licensed nutritionist, I have a national certification, but even those type of settings may not accept me as a professional. And that's really, unfortunate.
Well, it's a shame. Is what it is.
That's the system that we're in. There's certain states where I legally, cannot practice. And I feel really bad because there's some folks that have reached out to me from these webinars that are in states where it's, literally illegal for me to practice with them and work with them. So, because you have to be RD, you have to be a registered dietitian. So.
Well, Sarah, you opened up a can of worms talking about your liver bacon pate. So you're going to have to share that recipe because my phone just lit up with about 20 people wanting the recipe.
I definitely have. It's bacon, chicken liver, pate.
We'll get that posted.
Yep.
Okay, Ted here says, personally, I think the popularity of these plant-based fake foods is just because most people are too lazy to do their homework concerning food and its consequences. Thanks for the presentation and keep pushing back. Hopefully the info will find its way to enough people to open their eyes and reject this poor excuse for food. It's a great comment, Ted.
Thank you, yeah.
I know we're getting short on time here, Sarah. So how much longer do you want to go?
Oh, I'm good. You keep going.
So Stefan here says, I guess we've got a controversy going on about bacon fat.
Oh, God.
Depending on the feed, a lot of lard is around 60% monounsaturated fat and about 10% PUFAs. It's only around 30% SFAs. Most dietetic associations were founded by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, whose teaching is that meat causes people to have carnal desires and thus should be avoided. So I don't know if that's more of a comment or what, but.
Yeah, actually, he mentioned something interesting. Yeah, pork fat is high in oleic acid. And I was really happy when I found that out. Oleic acids are really important omega-9 fat. And that's one of those fats that helps build a healthy cell membrane, and it has this role of transporting minerals into the cell. But oleic acid you get, usually in like olive oil, and it's, one of those type of monounsaturated fats, avocados. But another reason to eat bacon.
Absolutely. More the bacon, the happier you are. Hey, Sarah, I've got a comment and a question. I think we've maybe discussed this a little bit, but, a lot of kids nowadays were, coming down with food allergies. And I know we had a little bit of a comment prior to your webinar tonight, but, are you seeing any correlations or anything distinguishing food allergies? I mean, as in, a food allergy being derived from basically conventional produced foods. And if someone maybe kind of alters their diet and starts trying a more of a regenerative pasture-based food, are those allergies kind of disappearing, or what are you seeing at the clinician level?
Absolutely. I see so many good changes when even when I can just get people to move to like, a 50 to 75% organic diet and more pasture-raised meats. And my clients know, I get them a handout on all the local farmers and here's the places that you need to start sourcing your meat from. And they see, just making that change alone, yeah, they see really good shifts in their health. I mean, inflammation just starts to calm down, digestive issues go away, aches and pains. I've had lots of clients tell me things like, I can run again. I don't have joint pain anymore. And, the brain fog, and I can think more clearly. And it's always hard to know, like, what is it? Was it the toxins in the food that was causing the problems? Was it the really poor omega-6 to 3 ratio? And I can never say conclusively, it was this reason or that reason, but I definitely see huge shifts. And that's why I love that Secret Ingredients movie, because just by people shifting to an organic diet, it's just incredible the changes that you see with people. And then when you add to that, working on gut healing and correcting nutrient deficiencies, and that's where some of the testing really can come into play and kind of help you fine tune things even more with people's health. That's when you really see even more wonderful changes, when you can kind of fill in those nutritional gaps. But when it comes to allergies or even food sensitivities, where they have those like IgG and IgA reactions, if people can just, stay away from those foods for a few months, ideally, I tell people try to aim for 5 to 6 months, get that immune system inflammation to kind of calm down, get your immune system to calm down, and work on, healing the gut. You might be able to reintroduce that food and have it again someday. Now, true food allergy is different, right? IgE reaction, you're pretty much going to have that, for life. But IgG and IgE reactions are very different, and it might be possible to kind of restore your ability to respond normally to that food again, especially if you do that gut healing combined with it. But with the exception of wheat, I think wheat is one of those things where no matter what kind of reaction you're having, most people can never have wheat again if they're reactive to wheat.
I got a question here as you've been talking that kind of came to mind. What's your viewpoint on fasting, and how does that affect the gut microbiome? And
yeah,
this is kind of some fascinating stuff that I've read some things on, and I would like your opinion as a nutritionist.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of fasting. I mean, I personally do intermittent fasting every day, and I've been doing that for years. So I don't eat breakfast. I just eat lunch and dinner. Every once in a while, I might do like a whole day fast, and I used to do longer water fasts. And to me, they're very draining. But then again, I did those fasts too, and I wasn't as optimally healthy. So fasting can be a problem for some people if they're in kind of like a toxic overload, because that's when the toxins really come out. And there's very interesting studies on that. When people fast for like 24 hours or more, they start to see levels of carcinogens go up in their blood, and that's coming from the fat cells. Because
wow.
The fat cells that store toxins. So you have to really be able to open up all your avenues of detoxification really well to get those toxins out, because it's kind of like you're kind of damaging yourself just by fasting. So you got to make sure you're supporting the liver and drinking tons of water, urinating, having regular bowel movements, so that you're really able to get those toxins out of your system. But yeah, as far as like the gut and the microbiome, I mean, there's a lot of good evidence that it's helpful for that too. A lot of my patients with SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, that's becoming a really common condition. It's basically IBS. When they can do some fasting and do some like intermittent fasting, I tell them you're giving your digestive chance a chance to relax and do some healing, because when we're eating all the time, that lining also has a hard time healing. You can't heal as quickly. So fasting can be very therapeutic, but you also have to kind of ease into it. Some people have to ease into it, but intermittent fasting's it's just awesome. I think most people get great results with intermittent fasting, from weight loss, gut health improvements, better energy, mental clarity. So.
No, well, I think we're going to do one more question here, Sarah, before we wrap it up for the night.
Shane?
Yeah, Ray, go ahead.
Can I ask her a question, please? I think that Shane, as Sarah, thank you once again. And as a panelist, I wanted to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Sarah, we've known in the soil biology realm that when certain microorganisms are not present in the soil, it affects its function. And the more we find out in doing genetic DNA in the soils, that's becoming more and more evident. Coming to the human health and to the biome, the intestinal biome, I came across some real interesting literature, doing some research on fecal transplant, is that they did a study where they had people that schizophrenia, and schizophrenia is kind of personal to me because my sister passed away from that. But they found that people that had schizophrenia had a particular microbe in them, and they took that microbe and put it into mice, and the mice acted very differently mentally. Mm-hmm. What I'm finding out in the evidence that they are having incredibly great success by these fecal transplants, but if you get it from very healthy people. But it's interesting, you cannot do that legally in this country because they consider poop a drug. But in Europe or others, that's not the case. Can you kind of tell us a little bit what you think about the biome and that fecal transplant and the potential of it?
Yeah, I think it's legal in Canada because I've actually had a couple patients that have gone up there and had it done. But I don't know a lot about it. I mean, there's a few doctors that collaborate with. One did actually send her patient to the UK to have it done. So, and for the most part, I hear really good things about it. You know, it's expensive though, and so it's really unfortunate when it doesn't work out. But yeah, it's been life-changing for a couple SIBO patients that I've worked with. You know, in something like SIBO, which is an overgrowth of bad bacteria, for the most part, you can treat that through, you know, certain antibiotics and antimicrobials, natural antimicrobials, and kind of, you know, dampen down some of the bad bacteria, bolster up the beneficial bacteria, and sort of rebalance the microbiome and work on other aspects of gut healing, and you can make good progress with that condition that way. But there's some people, you know, you can do everything with, you know, all kinds of supplements and diets, and it doesn't matter, they just don't get better. And I feel like those are the people that really would benefit from fecal transplants. And it's really unfortunate that it's not allowed here. But yeah, I think I've heard just really amazing things about it from some patients. So I think the microbiome is, I mean, I'm in two worlds all the time now because I'm trying to keep up with everything going on within the healthcare world and then everything going on within regenerative agriculture. So it's so hard to keep up with all the literature and everything that's going on out there. And the microbiome, you know, research is just exploding, as you guys know. And we're, you know, it's kind of interesting that we can start to make correlations between certain species of bacteria and certain conditions like you're talking about. And even like the bacterium that I mentioned, the Akkermansia, that can help with that mucosal healing. So yeah, and it's also like what in the diet is making that microbial diversity worse, and what microbes, you know, are we getting exposed to that are also, you know, contributing to that imbalance. And there was a study you made me think of where they gave rats artificial sweeteners and it negatively impacted their microbiome. And then they did like a fecal transplant from that group of mice to another one, and it induced the same health problems that the artificial sweeteners did in the other group. So essentially what that told us was the artificial sweeteners were damaging the microbiome that was causing like weight gain. I think it was like weight gain that was happening with the rats from the artificial sweeteners, insulin resistance. So yeah, I mean, the microbiome is really fascinating. I do a few functional stool tests, and, you know, it's a lot to wrap your mind around because, you know, you get those reports back and it's just, there's so many different species of bacteria, and they're the way these functional tests are working is that they can actually group some of those bacteria based on the studies we have so far and make correlations between, well, if we see a high number of this bacterium and this bacterium and this bacterium, you're more predisposed to having an autoimmune disorder or a neurological disorder, like you mentioned, or, or certain cancers or heart disease. Certain changes in the microbiome can affect cholesterol, so there's a lot of interesting research about it. And so I do that stool testing to try to help modulate the microbiome, but there's still so much we don't know. There's so much we don't know and need to understand about the microbiome.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Well, Sarah, I think we're going to call it an evening. We, on behalf of Soil Health Academy and Understanding Ag, we really thank you for your presentation tonight and your knowledge. And, we're proud to have you as part of our team. I mean,
thank you.
Leading experts like you out here trying to educate people on nutrient-dense foods and the aspects of human health. So, we're very thankful for that. We just want to make everyone aware. We do have an online academy that's going to be released here around December the 21st that we want people to take a look at with all the 4 partners, talking about, anything from the 6 principles, the ecosystem services, to regenerative grazing or adaptive grazing, and soil microbiology. So be looking at that, be looking at future webinars we'll have coming up. We're going to have an array of them coming after the first of the year with some of the leading experts in regards to regenerative agricultural practices. So thank you again. Thank you, Sarah. Everyone have a wonderful holiday season coming up here, and we'll talk to you here after the first of the year. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for coming, everybody.
Take care. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.